I never thought I'd be starting over at 68. Not after raising 2 children, not after 39 years of marriage, and certainly not after investing my entire life savings into my son's business. But here I am, sitting on the porch of my small cottage by the ocean, listening to the waves crash against the shore, wondering how I went from being the matriarch of my family to someone my son could so easily discard. Someone he called just a burden when he thought I couldn't. Hear him. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It all happened so fast. One day I was Janet Mackenzie, proud mother and grandmother, the woman who wrote the check that started what would become Horizon Technologies. The next, I was lying in a hospital bed, unable to move the right side of my body, overhearing my son tell his wife that taking care of me would be too much of a burden on their perfect life. What my son didn't realize was that stroke patients can often hear everything happening around them, even when they appear unresponsive, and what I heard that day changed everything. My name is Janet Mackenzie, though everyone calls me Jan. For most of my adult life, I defined myself through other people. Mother to Kevin and Lisa, wife to Richard, grandmother to Kevin's children, Ethan and Mia. I was the person who made Thanksgiving dinners for 14 people without breaking a sweat, who remembered every birthday and anniversary, who hosted the neighborhood block parties every summer without fail. Richard and I weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. He had worked as an engineer for 35 years at the same manufacturing company, while I had built a modest career as a real estate agent. We had saved diligently, planning for a retirement filled with travel and relaxation. We had done everything right, or so I thought. Then Richard died suddenly of a heart attack at 64, just 8 months before his planned retirement. I was devastated, but I still had my children, my grandchildren, and our savings. I would be okay, I told myself. The grief was overwhelming at times, but I kept moving forward. That's what Richard would have wanted. About 6 months after Richard's death, my son Kevin came to me with a business proposal. He had been working in software development for over a decade and had an idea for a new platform that would revolutionize how small businesses manage their inventory. All he needed was startup capital, $240,000 to be exact. "Mom, this is a sure thing," he had said, spreading ambitious projections across my dining room table. "In 2 years, we'll triple the investment. You'll be able to travel the world in style, just like you and Dad always planned." I hesitated. This was a significant portion of my retirement fund, and I wasn't getting any younger. But the way Kevin's eyes lit up when he talked about his vision reminded me so much of Richard. My late husband had always regretted not taking more chances in his career. "I don't want to be 65 and wondering what if, Mom," Kevin insisted. "This is my chance to build something meaningful, something that would make Dad proud." That was the clincher. The idea of continuing Richard's legacy through our son's success was too powerful to resist. The next day, I transferred $240,000 to Kevin's business account. We signed loan documents stating that the money would be paid back with interest within 5 years, or I would receive a 30% stake in the company. Kevin had insisted on the paperwork, to keep everything professional, he'd said. The first 2 years of Horizon Technologies were rocky but promising. Kevin worked 18-hour days, often sleeping on a cot in the small office space he had rented downtown. I would bring him home-cooked meals and help with administrative tasks whenever I could. His wife, Melissa, managed their household and children largely on her own during this period, and I stepped in frequently to help with Ethan and Mia so she could maintain her part-time job as a high school counselor. When the business finally turned a profit in its 3rd year, we all celebrated. Kevin moved the company into a larger space, hired his first employees, and began paying himself a modest salary. By year 4, Horizon had 28 employees and had expanded its services beyond inventory management to comprehensive business software solutions. Kevin no longer needed my home-cooked meals or administrative help. He was too busy meeting with investors and potential clients to stop by more than once every couple of weeks. I didn't mind. This was what success looked like, and I was immensely proud of what he had built, what we had built together. The 5-year mark approached, and though Kevin hadn't yet repaid the loan, the company was clearly thriving. I assumed we would soon discuss my ownership stake, as per our agreement. Then came my 68th birthday. Kevin and Melissa hosted a small gathering at their new home, a sprawling 5-bedroom house in Oakwood Heights, the most exclusive neighborhood in our town of Cedar Ridge. The house was beautiful, with soaring ceilings, a gourmet kitchen, and a backyard that overlooked the town's reservoir. It was a far cry from the modest 3-bedroom home where I had raised him. "Quite an upgrade from the apartment, isn't it?" Kevin had said, noticing my wide-eyed expression as I took in their new surroundings. "It's lovely," I replied, genuinely happy for his success. "You've worked hard for this." "We've been blessed," Melissa added, though her smile seemed strained. I had always gotten along well with my daughter-in-law, but there had been a subtle shift in our relationship ever since the business took off. Gone were the days of casual coffee dates and shopping trips. Now our interactions were limited to formal family gatherings, each one more elaborately staged than the last. The birthday dinner was pleasant enough. My daughter Lisa had flown in from Seattle with her partner, and my grandchildren were on their best behavior. As I blew out the candles on an undoubtedly expensive cake, I felt a momentary pang of loneliness. Richard should have been there to see all this. Our son's success, our grandchildren growing up, the family we had built together. After dinner, as Lisa helped Melissa clear the dishes, Kevin took me aside to his home office. It was impeccably decorated with awards and company recognition plaques lining the walls. "I have something for you, Mom," he said, pulling out an envelope from his desk drawer. "Happy birthday." Inside was a check for $50,000. I looked at it, confused. "I know I still owe you on the loan," Kevin explained. "This is the first installment. With how things are growing at Horizon, I should be able to pay you back in full within the next 2 years. I was stunned. According to our agreement, the loan should have been repaid in full already, or I should have received my ownership stake. The company was clearly worth millions now. A 30% stake would far exceed the original loan amount. "Kevin, what about our agreement? It's been over 5 years. I thought we discussed that I would become a part owner if the loan wasn't repaid within that time frame." My son's expression changed so quickly it caught me off guard. His warm smile vanished, replaced by something colder, more calculating. "Mom, that was just a formality. Surely you didn't actually think you would own part of Horizon? That agreement was written when the company was nothing but an idea. Things are different now. We have investors, a board of directors. It's complicated." "But we signed papers," I insisted, feeling suddenly very old and very foolish. "We had an agreement." Kevin sighed, as if explaining something to a child. "Those papers wouldn't hold up legally if challenged. Besides, I'm paying you back with interest. Isn't that enough? Dad wouldn't have wanted us to argue over money." The mention of Richard struck me like a physical blow. My husband had been meticulous about financial matters. He would never have dismissed a legally binding agreement as a formality. "This isn't about the money, Kevin," I said quietly. "It's about honoring your word." "I am honoring my word," he replied, his voice rising slightly. "I'm paying you back more than you invested when you consider the interest. Look, Mom, I've built this company from nothing. Yes, your investment helped, and I'm grateful, but I'm the one who put in the 80-hour weeks. I'm the one who took the risks." I felt a heaviness in my chest that had nothing to do with my heart health. "I never said you didn't work hard, Kevin. I'm just asking you to honor our agreement." "The agreement was made under different circumstances," he insisted. "Things change. Businesses evolve. We went back and forth for nearly an hour, our voices never rising above a tense murmur so the others wouldn't hear. In the end, Kevin made it clear that I would receive my investment back with interest, but I would never have an ownership stake in Horizon Technologies. The company was his and his alone. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I left his office feeling numb. The $50,000 check seemed to burn in my purse as I rejoined the party, plastering on a smile for my grandchildren. I didn't want to ruin the evening, so I said nothing about our conversation to Lisa or anyone else. But something fundamental had shifted that night. For the first time, I saw my son clearly, not as the boy I had raised, but as the man he had become. The drive back to my condo that night was a blur. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, wondering where I had gone wrong. Had I spoiled Kevin? Had I failed to instill proper values? Or was this simply who he had always been, and I had been too blind to see it? 2 weeks later, I woke up feeling strange. My right arm was tingling, and when I tried to get out of bed, my leg buckled beneath me. I managed to reach my phone and call 911 before my vision began to blur. The paramedics arrived quickly, but by then I could no longer speak clearly. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was the terrifying realization that I was having a stroke. I awoke in the intensive care unit of Cedar Ridge Memorial Hospital. The right side of my body was paralyzed, and I could only manage slurred, simple words. The doctors explained that I had suffered an ischemic stroke. A blood clot had blocked an artery to my brain. I had been fortunate that help arrived quickly, but my recovery would be long and uncertain. Kevin and Melissa visited that first day. They stood awkwardly at the foot of my bed, Melissa clutching a bouquet of flowers, Kevin staring at the medical equipment as if it might bite him. "The doctors say you're going to need extensive rehabilitation," Kevin said after the obligatory "how are you" feelings. "They're talking about a rehab facility, then possibly in-home care for a while." I tried to respond, but the words came out garbled. Frustration welled up inside me. I could think clearly, but my body refused to cooperate. "Don't try to talk too much, Jan," Melissa said gently. "The speech therapist will be working with you soon." They stayed for exactly 30 minutes, the minimum socially acceptable time for visiting a parent in the hospital. As they prepared to leave, a nurse came in to check my vitals. "One of you will need to meet with the discharge planner tomorrow," she explained. "We'll need to discuss rehabilitation options and home care arrangements." Kevin and Melissa exchanged a look I couldn't quite decipher. "I have meetings all day tomorrow," Kevin said quickly. "Melissa, can you handle it?" My daughter-in-law's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I have to take Mia to her orthodontist appointment, remember? And then I'm helping with the school fundraiser." "Well, someone needs to deal with this," the nurse said, clearly accustomed to families negotiating. "The burden of elder care. How about the day after tomorrow? 10 a.m.? "I'll make it work," Kevin finally conceded, though he didn't look pleased. After they left, I drifted in and out of sleep, the hospital sounds blending with my troubled thoughts. The next time I opened my eyes, it was evening and the hospital had grown quieter. I heard voices outside my door, Kevin and Melissa, apparently unaware that I was awake, or perhaps assuming that my cognitive functions were as impaired as my speech. "We need to talk about what happens next," Melissa was saying, her voice low, but intense. "The nurse mentioned that even after rehab, your mom might need assistance at home for months." I know," Kevin replied, sounding frustrated. "I'll hire someone. There are services for this sort of thing." "Those services are expensive, Kevin, and her insurance will only cover so much." "What do you want me to say, Melissa? She can't come live with us. We don't have room." I felt a stab of hurt at that blatant lie. Their new house had 5 bedrooms and a finished basement with a separate entrance. They had more than enough space. I'm not suggesting she move in permanently, Melissa continued, but maybe for a few weeks until she's more stable? She's your mother, Kevin. There was a long pause before my son responded, and when he did, his words froze my heart. Look, I know this sounds harsh, but I can't put everything on hold to take care of her. The Singapore deal is coming through next month. The Philips contract is up for renewal. I can't have this. This burden right now. Burden. My own son had called me a burden. She's not a burden. She's your mother, Melissa hissed, and for a moment, I felt grateful to my daughter-in-law for defending me. That's not what I meant, Kevin backpedaled. Of course I care about her, but you have to be practical. My mom is 68 years old and just had a severe stroke. Even if she recovers fully, which the doctors say is unlikely, she's going to need more and more care as time goes on. We have to think about Ethan and Mia, about our future. Your future was built with her money, Melissa reminded him, her voice sharp. Money I'm paying back, Kevin countered. Look, I'll handle it. I'll find a good facility, the best care money can buy. But I have a business to run, a business that supports all of us, including the money for her care. I can't be at her beck and call. They moved away from the door then, their voices fading down the hallway, but the damage was done. I lay in my hospital bed, unable to move, unable to speak clearly, tears sliding silently down my face. Burden. The word echoed in my mind, more painful than any physical ailment. In that moment, I realized two devastating truths. My son saw me as nothing more than an obligation, an inconvenience to his carefully constructed life. And I had no one to advocate for me now that Richard was gone. That night, as I lay awake in the sterile hospital room, I made a decision. Stroke or no stroke, I would never allow myself to be anyone's burden again. If Kevin had forgotten who had funded his entire business, who had believed in him when no one else would, then I would have to remind him. Not with words, my damaged speech wouldn't allow for the eloquent lecture he deserved, but with actions. The next morning, when my doctor came to check on me, I managed to communicate that I wanted to see a social worker. She arrived that afternoon, a kind-eyed woman named Denise who patiently waited as I struggled to form words. Independent, I finally managed to say. Want to be independent. Denise seemed to understand. You want to know your options for recovery that don't involve depending on your son? I nodded emphatically. Over the next hour, with Denise's help and a letterboard she brought in, I was able to express my desires. I wanted information about rehabilitation centers with strong stroke recovery programs. I wanted to know about my insurance coverage and financial options. Most importantly, I wanted legal advice regarding my financial situation with Kevin. You mentioned a loan agreement. With your son, Denise said, reviewing the notes she had taken. Do you have a copy of this agreement? I nodded again. The paperwork was in my condo, in the fireproof lockbox where I kept all important documents. Would you like me to help you get in touch with an elder law attorney? Someone who could review this agreement and advise you on your options? Another emphatic nod. When Kevin arrived later that day for the meeting with the discharge planner, he found not only the hospital staff, but also Denise and a notary public. I had signed a medical power of attorney designating my daughter Lisa, not Kevin, as my healthcare proxy. I had also signed papers requesting that all discussions about my care and financial matters be directed to Lisa until she could arrive from Seattle. Kevin was stunned. Mom, what is this? Why would you do this without talking to me first? I'm right here in town. Lisa lives across the country. I looked him directly in the eye and said, as clearly as my impaired speech would allow, not. Asta or burden. The color drained from his face. He knew then that I had overheard his conversation with Melissa. For a moment, he looked genuinely ashamed, but that shame quickly morphed into defensiveness. "You misunderstood," he insisted. "I was just stressed. You know how much pressure I'm under with the business." The business I had funded. The business that, according to our agreement, I should partly own. The business he had built on the foundation of his mother's trust. "Lisa, coming," I managed to say. "Go, home." Kevin stood there, opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water. Finally, he turned and stormed out, nearly colliding with a nurse in the doorway. That confrontation marked the beginning of my journey back to myself. It wasn't easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is. But as I lay in that hospital bed, watching my son retreat from his responsibilities and from the truth of his actions, I felt something unexpected. Relief. The pretense was over. The illusions had been shattered. And in their place was a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I'm not sure if Kevin thought I would change my mind, that my rebellion was just a temporary reaction to overhearing his hurtful words. If so, he was sorely mistaken. What he didn't realize was that beneath the maternal softness, beneath the years of putting everyone else's needs before my own, was a core of steel that his father had always recognized and respected. Richard had once told me, during a particularly difficult period in our marriage, "John, you're the strongest person I know, not because you never break, but because you always find a way to rebuild." It was time to rebuild again. Only this time, I would be constructing a life that was truly my own. Lisa arrived from Seattle 2 days later, her face tight with worry as she strode into my hospital room. She took one look at me, connected to machines, unable to speak clearly, my right side motionless, and burst into tears. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be all right, but my words came out garbled and slurred. Instead, I squeezed her hand with my functioning left one, trying to convey the strength I still felt inside despite my broken body. "I came as soon as I could," she said, wiping her eyes and composing herself. The social worker filled me in on what's been happening. Kevin called me too, but his version was different. I could imagine. In Kevin's telling, I was probably confused, making irrational decisions because of my stroke. He would have painted himself as the concerned son, just trying to do what was best for his poor, addled mother. Lisa pulled a chair close to my bedside and took my hand. Unlike her brother, she had never been ambitious in traditional ways. She had pursued a career in environmental science, lived modestly, and valued experiences over possessions. There had been times when I worried about her future, wondering if her lack of financial focus would leave her vulnerable. Now, I was grateful for the person those values had shaped her into. "Mom, I need you to know something," she said, her voice steady. "I'm here for as long as you need me. My boss has approved a family medical leave, and Diane is taking care of our apartment and plants. I'm not going anywhere until we figure this out." The relief I felt was overwhelming. I wasn't alone. The tears came then, not tears of despair this time, but of gratitude. Over the next few days, Lisa became my voice, my advocate, and my shield. She coordinated with the doctors and therapists, interviewed rehabilitation facilities, and kept Kevin at bay when his presence became too stressful. When the hospital discharge planner suggested Cedar Pines Rehabilitation Center, an excellent facility known for its stroke recovery program, Lisa made all the arrangements. Kevin appeared the day before my scheduled transfer, this time without Melissa. He stood awkwardly in the doorway of my hospital room, a gift basket in his hands. "Can I come in?" he asked, directing the question to Lisa, who had barely spoken to him since her arrival. My daughter looked at me, eyebrows raised in silent question. I nodded slightly. Kevin placed the elaborate basket on the side table. It was filled with expensive lotions, gourmet snacks I couldn't eat with my swallowing difficulties, and a card signed by him, Melissa, and the children. How are you feeling today, Mom? He asked, his voice overly cheerful, as if he could erase our last encounter, through sheer force of pleasantness. Better, I managed, though the word came out slurred. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Finally, Kevin cleared his throat. Lisa mentioned you're being transferred to Cedar Pines tomorrow. I nodded. That's good. It's supposed to be one of the best in the state. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. I've been looking into their program. The average stay is 6 to 8 weeks, depending on progress. Another silence, heavier this time. Mom, about what you overheard, he began. Lisa interrupted. Should we be discussing this now? Mom's still recovering. It's fine, I said, the words coming slowly but more clearly than before. The speech therapy sessions were beginning to help. Kevin took a deep breath. I just want you to know that I didn't mean what you heard. I was stressed, tired, worried about you. I would never think of you as a, He couldn't even say the word now. Burden. You've always been there for me, for all of us, he continued. And I'm going to be there for you now, whatever you need. The promise rang hollow. If he couldn't even acknowledge what he had said, how could I trust anything else that came out of his mouth? The loan, I said, forcing the words out one syllable at a time. Our agreement. Kevin's expression changed instantly, a flash of annoyance quickly masked by concern. Mom, your health is what matters right now. We can discuss business. Matters when you're feeling better. No, I insisted, the single word coming out strong and clear. Now. Lisa looked between us, sensing the tension. What agreement is she talking about, Kevin? My son sighed dramatically. Mom invested in Horizon during the startup phase. I've been paying her back, with interest. She got a check on her birthday, remember? How much did she invest? Lisa pressed. Kevin hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. It was a significant amount, but like I said, I'm paying it back. 240,000, I managed to say. Lisa's eyes widened. You invested nearly $250,000. In Kevin's business? I nodded. It was a loan, Kevin insisted. A business arrangement. With terms, I added. Lisa turned to her brother. What terms? Kevin's face flushed. It's complicated. There was some language about converting to equity if the loan wasn't repaid within 5 years, but that was just a formality. The intention was always for it to be a loan. That's not what a signed contract would suggest, Lisa said coolly. Do you have a copy of this agreement, Mom? I nodded and pointed weakly toward my purse, which Lisa had brought from my condo. Inside was the key to my lockbox. We don't need to get into all that now, Kevin said quickly. The important thing is that Mom gets better, then we can sort out any financial concerns. But his attempt to deflect came too late. Lisa had already connected the dots. My sudden transfer of healthcare proxy. My request for an elder law attorney. My insistence on independence. This wasn't just about Kevin calling me a burden. It was about him trying to deny me what was rightfully mine. I think you should go, Lisa said, her voice calm but firm. Mom needs to rest before tomorrow's transfer. But I just got here, Kevin protested. And there are things we need to discuss about her care, her condo, her finances. All of which can wait, Lisa interrupted. Right now, her health is the priority. Isn't that what you just said? Trapped by his own words, Kevin had no choice but to leave. But as he reached the door, he turned back, his expression a complex mixture of frustration, guilt, and something else. Fear, perhaps. This isn't over, Mom, he said quietly. We're family. We'll work through this. After he left, Lisa sat beside me, her expression troubled. I'm missing something here, aren't I? This isn't just about him calling you a burden, or even about the loan. There's more. I nodded tiredly. Don't worry, she assured me, squeezing my hand. We'll figure it out together, one step at a time. The next day, I was transferred to Cedar Pines. The facility was modern and well-equipped, with a staff specialized in stroke rehabilitation. My first week there was grueling. Physical therapy twice daily, speech therapy, occupational therapy, cognitive assessments. I collapsed into exhausted sleep each night, too tired even to worry about Kevin or the business. Lisa stayed in town, renting a small furnished apartment near Cedar Pines. She visited daily, bringing proper clothes to replace the hospital gowns, reading to me, and helping me practice my speech exercises. One afternoon, about 2 weeks into my stay, she arrived with a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. I found the loan agreement, she said, sitting beside my bed, and I had it reviewed by an attorney who specializes in elder law and business contracts. I had made more progress than expected in my speech therapy, though my words still came slowly. What did he say? Lisa's expression was grim. The contract is solid, Mom. According to the terms, since Kevin didn't repay the loan within 5 years, you're entitled to a 30% ownership stake in Horizon Technologies. The attorney says it's enforceable. A wave of vindication washed over me. I hadn't imagined it. The agreement was real, legally binding, just as I'd thought. But here's where it gets complicated, Lisa continued. The attorney also says that Kevin has been taking steps that could potentially undermine your claim. What steps? He's restructured the company. About a year ago, he created a new entity, Horizon Global LLC, and has been transferring assets from the original company to the new one. The original Horizon Technologies, the one you have a claim to, is being hollowed out. The betrayal cut deep. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was calculated, deliberate deception. How did you find this out? I asked. The attorney had a paralegal do some basic corporate research. It's all public record. Lisa hesitated. Mom, there's something else. I found bank statements. In your lockbox. You've been withdrawing large sums every few months for the past 2 years. 20,000 here, 15,000 there. I nodded, unsurprised. Kevin needed more investment. Lisa's face fell. Oh, Mom, how much? Another 150,000. So altogether, you've given him almost $400,000? Lisa's voice rose in disbelief. That's almost your entire retirement savings. It was, in fact, exactly that. Nearly everything I had set aside for my future, all invested in my son's vision. I had believed in him so completely, had trusted him without reservation. Does he have documentation for these additional investments? Lisa asked. I shook my head. The subsequent investments had been more informal. A phone call, a request, my agreement. I had transferred the money without question, without paperwork. After all, he was my son. Why would I need protection from my own child? Lisa closed her eyes briefly, composing herself. Okay, here's what the attorney suggests. First, we document everything. The original loan, the additional investments, the terms that were agreed upon. Then we send a formal letter to Kevin, asserting your rights as a part owner of Horizon Technologies and requesting full financial disclosure. He won't like that, I said, the understatement bringing a small smile to both our faces. No, he won't, Lisa agreed. But it's a necessary first step. If he ignores the letter or refuses to cooperate, then we might need to consider legal action. The thought of suing my own son was almost unbearable. Despite everything, I still loved Kevin. I still remembered the little boy who had clung to my legs on his first day of kindergarten, the teenager who had worked nights and weekends to buy his first car. the young man who had sobbed in my arms when his college girlfriend broke his heart. "I know it's hard to think about," Lisa said gently, reading my expression. "But we need to protect what's yours, Mom. Not just for you, but for all of us. That money was meant to support you through your retirement. Without it, what happens when your medical needs increase? What happens if you need long-term care?" She was right, of course. The stroke had been a brutal reminder of my mortality and vulnerability. I had Medicare, but it wouldn't cover everything, especially if I needed extended care. The money Kevin owed me wasn't just about fairness or principle, it was about my survival. "Okay," I said finally. "Send the letter." The response came swifter than either of us expected. The very next day, Kevin stormed into Cedar Pines during my afternoon physical therapy session, waving a piece of paper. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, ignoring the startled therapist. "A legal notice? You're threatening to sue me?" My physical therapist, a no-nonsense woman named Brenda, stepped between us. "Sir, you need to leave. This is a therapy session." "She's my mother," Kevin snapped, "and we need to talk, now." "Your mother is my patient," Brenda replied firmly, "and she's in the middle of crucial rehabilitation. You can come back during visiting hours." For a moment, I thought Kevin might argue further, but something in Brenda's stance made him reconsider. He took a step back, his face flushed with anger. "Fine, but this isn't over." He pointed at me. "You can't possibly think this is a good idea, Mom, after everything I've done for you." After he stormed out, Brenda helped me back to my room, where Lisa was waiting, her face pale. "Kevin was just here," she said. "He nearly ran me over in the hallway." "He came to therapy," I explained. "Very angry." "I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have been there." "No, not your fault." I was getting better at forming sentences, though the words still came slowly. "He made his choice." That evening, as predicted, Kevin returned during visiting hours. This time, he brought reinforcements, Melissa and a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as James Donovan, legal counsel for Horizon Technologies. Lisa and I were in the small courtyard garden of Cedar Pines, enjoying the autumn sunshine. My right side was still largely unresponsive, but I could now sit upright in a wheelchair for longer periods without becoming exhausted. "Mom, we need to talk," Kevin said without preamble. "What you're doing is going to destroy this family." "Hello to you too, Kevin," Lisa said pointedly. "Melissa, and whoever you are." James Donovan stepped forward. "As I mentioned, I'm legal counsel for Horizon Technologies. Mrs. Mackenzie, I've reviewed the document you believe entitles you to an ownership stake in Mr. Mackenzie's company, and I must inform you that it has several fatal flaws that would make it unenforceable in court." "That's interesting," Lisa replied before I could struggle to form words, "because the elder law attorney we consulted had quite a different opinion." "With all due respect," Donovan continued smoothly, "elder law is a different specialty, entirely. Business contract law is complex, and there are numerous precedents that would apply in this case. Such as," Lisa challenged, "such as the fact that the agreement was made without proper consideration of business valuation, without appropriate legal representation for both parties, and without adherence to state securities regulations." He turned to me, his voice softening condescendingly. "Mrs. Mackenzie, I understand you're going through a difficult time right now. A lawsuit would be expensive, stressful, and ultimately futile. For everyone's sake, I'm hoping we can reach a more amicable resolution." The implication was clear. Drop the claim or face a lengthy, costly legal battle that I might not have the strength or resources to win. "What's your proposal?" I asked, determined not to be intimidated. Kevin stepped forward, exchanging a glance with his attorney. "Mom, I'm willing to accelerate the loan repayment. The full amount, plus 6% interest paid over the next 2 years. That's generous, and it's more than fair. That doesn't account for the additional investments, Lisa pointed out, or the fact that the 30% stake would be worth far more than the original loan amount now. There's no documentation for any additional investments, Donovan interjected. And as I've explained, the equity conversion clause is legally questionable at best. I looked at my son, my child whom I had raised, nurtured, and supported in every possible way, and saw a stranger. The Kevin I knew would never have brought an attorney to intimidate his stroke-recovering mother. The Kevin I knew would never have restructured his company to avoid fulfilling his obligations. The Kevin I knew wouldn't be standing here, trying to bully me into accepting less than what I was rightfully owed. "Kevin," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in weeks, fueled by a rising anger. "You know what we agreed. You know what's right." "What's right?" he repeated, his voice rising. "What's right is acknowledging who built this company. Yes, you loaned me startup money, and yes, I appreciate that. But I'm the one who worked 18-hour days for years. I'm the one who mortgaged my house. When we almost went under in year 2, I'm the one who fought for every client, every contract. With my money," I reminded him. "My retirement. Money I'm trying to pay back," he shouted. "But it's never enough, is it? Now you want to swoop in and claim ownership of something you had nothing to do with building." Melissa placed a restraining hand on her husband's arm. "Kevin, please. Not here." But he was too far gone to be calmed. "Do you have any idea what this lawsuit would do? It would damage investor confidence. It would create uncertainty in the market. It could literally destroy everything I've built. Then honor the agreement," I said simply. Kevin laughed bitterly. "You don't even understand what you're asking for. 30% of the company? Do you know what that's worth now? Millions. You want millions for a $240,000 loan, plus the other investments," Lisa reminded him. "Alleged investments?" Donovan corrected smoothly. "I have bank records," I said, "and witnesses, the accountant, who helped with transfers." That gave them pause. Kevin exchanged a worried glance with his attorney. "Even if there were additional investments," Donovan said carefully, "they wouldn't automatically entitle you to additional equity without specific written agreements to that effect." "Perhaps not legally," Lisa replied. "But morally? Ethically? A son taking hundreds of thousands from his widowed mother without documentation, then refusing to acknowledge it? How do you think that would play in the court of public opinion, Mr. Donovan?" The attorney's expression hardened. "Are you threatening to take this to the media, Ms. Mackenzie?" "I'm not threatening anything," Lisa replied calmly. "I'm simply pointing out that there are many ways to resolve disputes, some more public than others." The tension in the garden was palpable. Other residents and visitors had begun to notice our heated discussion, casting curious glances our way. Finally, Melissa stepped forward. "This isn't getting us anywhere. Kevin, we need to go. We can continue this discussion another time when everyone is calmer." Kevin looked like he wanted to argue, but after a moment's hesitation he nodded, stiffly. "Fine. But this needs to be resolved, Mom. One way or another." After they left, Lisa and I sat in silence for several minutes, watching the autumn leaves drift from the maple tree overhead. "That went well," Lisa finally said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Despite everything, I found myself laughing, a rough, unpracticed sound that surprised us both. It felt good, that laughter. It felt like the first step toward reclaiming something I had lost. "What do we do now?" I asked once the moment had passed. Lisa considered the question carefully. "We keep fighting, but we also keep living. You focus on your recovery. Let the attorneys handle Kevin. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm. Mornings were filled with physical and speech therapy, afternoons with occupational therapy and rest. Lisa visited daily, bringing small comforts. From home, my favorite Afghan, framed photos, the lavender hand cream I preferred. My right side began to show improvement, and my speech, while still slow, became more fluid. Kevin did not return to Cedar Pines, but his presence loomed over us nonetheless. His attorney sent increasingly detailed letters, each outlining reasons why my claim was invalid or impractical to pursue. Lisa's attorney, a sharp-minded woman named Judith Kleinman, responded with equal precision, countering each argument and reasserting my rights. The conflict spilled beyond legal correspondence. Melissa stopped bringing the children to visit. Friends from church, people I had known for decades, began to distance themselves, uncomfortable with the family drama. I learned later that Kevin had been sharing his version of events widely. Poor Kevin, dealing with his unreasonable mother who was confused after her stroke, trying to take credit and profits for the business he had built through his own hard work and ingenuity. The isolation hurt, but it also clarified things. The people who stood by me, Lisa, a handful of true friends, the staff at Cedar Pines who had come to know and respect me, were the ones who mattered now. The rest, those who could be so easily swayed by Kevin's narrative, perhaps hadn't been true friends to begin with. One morning, about 6 weeks into my stay at Cedar Pines, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Carol Whitman, my closest friend since Richard and I had first moved to Cedar Ridge 30 years ago. Carol and I had raised our children together, supported each other through life's challenges, celebrated each other's joys. Yet since my stroke, she had visited only once, briefly and awkwardly, before disappearing from my life. "Jan," she said, hovering uncertainly in the doorway of my room. "May I come in?" I nodded, curious about what had brought her back after weeks of silence. Carol looked older than I remembered, the lines around her eyes deeper, her shoulders slightly stooped. She sat gingerly on the edge of the visitor's chair, clutching her purse as if it might protect her from whatever was to come. "I owe you an apology," she began, her voice wavering. "I've been a terrible friend." I waited, giving her space to continue. "Kevin came to me, to Harold and me about 3 weeks ago. He told us you were confused, that the stroke had affected your judgment, that you were trying to take his company because you couldn't remember that the money you gave him was a gift, not an investment." She paused, gathering courage. "And I believed him, Jan. God help me, I believed him." The admission stung, but I wasn't entirely surprised. Kevin had always been charming, persuasive. And Carol had known him since he was a boy, had watched him grow into the successful businessman he appeared to be. "What changed?" I asked. Carol twisted her hands in her lap. "I ran into Melissa at the grocery store yesterday. She seemed upset, so I asked if everything was all right. She started talking about the family situation, about how stressful it's been for everyone. And then she said something that didn't sit right with me. She said they were just trying to protect the company from your claims." Carol looked up, her eyes clear and direct now. "Not protect you, Jan. Protect the company from you." It struck me as such a backward way of thinking, and it made me wonder what else Kevin might have misrepresented. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "So, I came here to ask you directly. No middlemen, no lawyers. What really happened with Kevin's business? With the money?" Slowly, carefully, I told her everything. The initial loan, the agreement, the additional investments, Kevin's refusal to honor our arrangement, his cruel words at the hospital. As my speech therapy had progressed, I could now string together longer sentences, though I still spoke more slowly than before. When I finished, Carol was silent for a long moment. Then she unfolded the paper she had brought and handed it to me. "I think you should see this." It was a printout of an email, dated 2 years ago, from Kevin to his accountant. In it, Kevin referred explicitly to my mother's latest investment of $45,000 and discussed how it would be recorded in the company books. He also mentioned that, once the company valuation exceeds $10 million, we'll need to revisit the original agreement about her equity stake. "How did you get this?" I asked, stunned. Harold and Kevin serve on the hospital board together. They share an administrative assistant, Becky. She's been helping Kevin organize some files recently, and she came across this email chain. She was uncomfortable with what she read, especially after hearing the version Kevin's been spreading around town. Carol hesitated. Becky could lose her job for sharing this, but she felt you needed to know. The email was clear evidence that Kevin had been fully aware of our arrangement, had acknowledged the additional investments, and had recognized the potential equity conversion, directly contradicting what he and his attorney were now claiming. "This changes everything," I said, my mind racing with implications. Carol squeezed my hand. "Use it, Jan, and know that you have more people on your side than you realize. Not everyone believes Kevin's version of events." After Carol left, I sat by the window of my room, watching the autumn rain blur the world outside. The email printout lay heavy in my lap, a tangible proof of my son's duplicity. It was painful to have such confirmation, yet liberating too. I wasn't confused. I wasn't imagining things. The stroke hadn't impaired my understanding of our agreement or my memory of our history. When Lisa arrived that afternoon, I shared Carol's visit and the email with her. Her eyes widened as she read it. "This is exactly what we needed," she said, already pulling out her phone to call Judith. "This contradicts everything Kevin and his attorney have been claiming." But as she began to dial, I placed my hand over hers, stopping her. "Wait," I said. "I need to think." Lisa looked at me questioningly. "About what?" "This is the smoking gun, Mom. With this evidence, Judith says we have a much stronger case." "Not about the case," I explained. "About what?" "I want, really want." My daughter set her phone down, giving me her full attention. "What do you mean?" I gestured to the room around us, the institutional beige walls, the hospital, bed, the wheelchair parked in the corner. "This is my life now. Recovery. Rebuilding." I tapped my temple. "Stroke changes. Everything. Priorities." "Are you saying you want to drop the case?" Lisa asked, clearly confused. "After everything Kevin's done?" I shook my head. "No. Justice matters. Truth matters." I paused, searching for the right words. But revenge doesn't. Humiliating Kevin doesn't. Lisa was silent for a moment, processing. "So what do you want to do with this information?" "Use it. For settlement," I said. "Fair one. No court. No publicity." I looked directly at my daughter. "No destroying his company." Because, despite everything, Kevin was still my son. And the company, regardless of his attempts to minimize my role, was still partly my legacy. I didn't want to tear it down. I just wanted what was rightfully mine. Lisa nodded slowly. "A settlement, with this evidence as leverage, but without going to court or going public." She considered the idea. "It could work. Judith has been suggesting mediation as an option anyway." Yes, mediation. The word felt right. A middle path. A way to seek justice without seeking destruction. "Are you sure, Mom?" Lisa asked, studying my face. "After what he said about you, how he's treated you, you'd still protect him?" I thought about Kevin as a child, his small hand in mine as we crossed streets. I thought about him as a teenager, proud but vulnerable. I thought about him as a new father, holding Ethan with such tender wonder. Not protecting. Him, I said finally. Protecting me, my peace. Because that's what this was really about, I realized. Not just the money, not just the principal, but my peace of mind. My ability to move forward without bitterness, consuming what remained of my life. Lisa's eyes filled with tears. You're a better person than I would be. I smiled slightly. No, just older. Had more practice. Forgiving. And it was true. Over nearly 7 decades of life, I had learned that holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It accomplished nothing except to corrode my own soul. That didn't mean Kevin deserved forgiveness, or that he would receive it easily. It didn't mean I would simply walk away from what was mine. But it did mean that I would pursue justice on my own terms, guided by wisdom, rather than vindictiveness. Let's call. Judith, I said, reaching for Lisa's phone. Start the process. The path ahead would not be easy. Kevin would resist, argue, perhaps even threaten again. The negotiations would be tense, the emotions raw. But for the first time since waking up in that hospital bed, unable to move or speak clearly, I felt truly in control of my own destiny. The stroke had taken things from me. Mobility, fluency, independence. But it had given me something too. Perspective. The clarity to see what truly mattered and the courage to fight for it. The morning of the mediation arrived with a crisp, December chill. 3 months had passed since my stroke, and while I was far from fully recovered, I had made remarkable progress. My speech, though still measured, had become more fluid. I could stand with assistance and take a few halting steps. With a walker, the right side of my face, once frozen in a slack-jawed droop, had regained much of its animation. Are you sure you're up for this? Lisa asked as she helped me dress in a simple navy pantsuit, one of the few professional outfits that still fit comfortably over my changed body. Judith says she can represent you fully if you'd prefer to stay here. I shook my head firmly. Need to be there, see his face, hear his voice. It wasn't about confrontation, not exactly. It was about bearing witness to whatever resolution emerged. After devoting decades of my life to Kevin, after investing not just my money but my hopes and dreams in his future, I deserved to be present for this reckoning. Cedar Pines had arranged for a medical transport van to take us to the law offices where the mediation would be held. The therapists had been working with me specifically on the skills I would need for today. Sitting upright for extended periods, managing my fatigue, communicating effectively despite my lingering speech difficulties. Every staff member had wished me luck that morning, many with fierce hugs and whispered encouragements. In the short time I had been there, they had become like family. The law firm of Kleinman, Russo, and Mitchell occupied the top floor of one of Cedar Ridge's few high-rise buildings. The conference room where the mediation would take place offered sweeping views of the snow-dusted mountains beyond the town. Under different circumstances, I might have appreciated the scenery. Judith Kleinman greeted us warmly, her trademark crimson reading glasses perched atop her silver hair. At 62, she was younger than me, but old enough to have experienced her share of life's complications. She had taken my case with a passion that went beyond professional interest, outraged by what she saw as a son's betrayal of his vulnerable mother. They just arrived, she informed us, helping me settle into an ergonomic chair she had specially arranged for my comfort. Kevin, Melissa, and 2 attorneys, James Donovan, whom you've met, and another lawyer named Martin Greaves. They've also brought their CFO. I nodded, unsurprised. Kevin was coming prepared for battle, armed with legal and financial experts. It was his way. overwhelm opposition with a show of force. "Remember," Judith said, laying a gentle hand on my shoulder, "the mediator is here to facilitate a resolution, not to make a ruling. If at any point you need a break or want to speak privately with me, just say so. Your health comes first." The mediator, a retired judge named Edward Campbell, entered first. He was a tall, imposing figure with a surprisingly kind face, introducing himself with a warmth that immediately put me at ease. He explained the process clearly, emphasizing the confidential nature of our discussions and his role as a neutral party. Then Kevin and his entourage arrived. My son looked thinner than I remembered, dark circles beneath his eyes suggesting sleepless nights. Melissa, elegantly dressed as always, avoided eye contact. The trio of men in suits, 2 attorneys and the CFO, formed a protective phalanx around them. "Mrs. Mackenzie," Judge Campbell began after introductions were complete, "I understand you've had some health challenges recently. How are you feeling today?" "Better, thank you," I replied carefully, determined to speak as clearly as possible. "Ready to proceed." Kevin's expression registered subtle surprise at my improved speech. Perhaps he had expected, even hoped, that I would appear more impaired, reinforcing his narrative about my diminished capacity. The mediator nodded approvingly. "I'm glad to hear that. Now I've reviewed the submissions from both sides, and I understand we're here to resolve a dispute regarding investments made by Mrs. Mackenzie in Horizon Technologies and the terms under which those investments were made." What followed were opening statements from both legal teams. Judith outlined my position succinctly. The original $240,000 loan with its equity conversion clause, the subsequent investments totaling another $150,000, and Kevin's failure to honor our agreement once the company became successful. She presented the email Carol had provided, along with bank records documenting each transfer. James Donovan responded with a carefully constructed narrative about a mother's generosity being misinterpreted as business investment, about informal, family discussions being inappropriately formalized in an amateur contract, about a stroke victim's confusion regarding past events. He spoke of Kevin's dedication to the company, the sacrifices he had made, the risks he had taken that I had not. Throughout his presentation, I maintained steady eye contact with my son. Kevin, however, repeatedly looked away, fixing his gaze on the mountains, the conference table, his notes, anywhere but at me. Judge Campbell listened attentively to both sides before addressing the room. "I appreciate the thorough presentations. Now, I'd like to hear directly from Mrs. Mackenzie and Mr. Mackenzie. Not their legal arguments, but their perspective on how we arrived at this point." All eyes turned to me. I took a deep breath, organizing my thoughts. This was why I had insisted on attending, for this moment, this chance to speak my truth. "I believed in Kevin," I began, my words measured but clear. "When no one else would fund his idea, I did. Not just with money, but with time, effort, support. We signed an agreement, 5 years to repay, or 30% ownership. Clear terms." He agreed readily. I paused, taking a sip of water before continuing. Business grew. Kevin needed more money. I gave it, my retirement savings. No new paperwork, because I trusted my son. I looked directly at Kevin. The 5 years passed, no repayment. Instead, Kevin restructured company, tried to erase my claim. When I had stroke, he called me a burden. The simplicity of my statement hung in the air. I had not raised my voice or used emotional language, yet the room was thick with tension. Judge Campbell turned to Kevin. "Mr. Mackenzie." My son cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "First, I want to say that I deeply regret any hurt I've caused my mother. The comment she overheard at the hospital was said in a moment of extreme stress and doesn't reflect how I truly feel about her." He glanced at his attorneys before continuing. "Regarding the funding of Horizon Technologies, Mom did provide initial capital, which I've always intended to repay with interest. There was a document drafted in those early days that mentioned equity conversion, but it was never meant to be formally binding. It was more of a gesture, a way to reassure her that her money was safe. A gesture documented by an attorney and signed by both parties? Judge Campbell asked mildly. Kevin flushed. A family friend who happened to be an attorney helped draft it, yes. But the context was different then. The company was nothing, just an idea. 30% made sense when the total value was essentially zero. Now that Horizon is worth... He stopped abruptly, perhaps realizing how his words sounded. Worth millions? Judge Campbell finished for him. And that's precisely why you believe the agreement shouldn't be honored? Because it would now cost you more than you anticipated? It's not that simple, Kevin insisted. Mom wasn't a true investor. She didn't take any of the risks I did. She didn't work the 80-hour weeks. She didn't mortgage her house when... We almost went under in year 2. I believe she did risk something, Judge Campbell observed. Her retirement security, from what I understand. The mediation continued for hours, moving from the conference room to separate breakout sessions where the mediator shuttled between parties with various proposals and counterproposals. By mid-afternoon, I was exhausted, my speech beginning to slur more noticeably as fatigue set in. Judith noticed immediately. We need to take a break, she insisted. My client requires rest. Judge Campbell agreed, suggesting we reconvene after a 30-minute recess. Lisa helped me to a quiet office where I could lie down briefly. You're doing great, Mom, she said, adjusting a pillow beneath my head. Judith thinks Kevin is feeling the pressure. That email Carol provided really undermined his position. I nodded tiredly. The emotional toll of the day was catching up, with me, but I was determined to see it through. This wasn't just about money. It was about recognition. Acknowledgement of my role, my contribution, my worth. When we returned to the conference room, I was surprised to find only Kevin waiting with Judge Campbell. The attorneys, Melissa, and the CFO were conspicuously absent. I asked for a few minutes alone with you, Mom, Kevin explained. Just us and Judge Campbell. Is that okay? I looked to Judith, who nodded encouragingly. I'll be right outside if you need me. After Lisa and Judith left, a heavy silence filled the room. Kevin stared out the window at the mountains, his profile so like his father's it made my heart ache. For a moment, I could see the little boy he had once been, earnest, determined, full of dreams. I've been thinking about when I was 12, he finally said, still gazing out the window. When Dad lost his job at the manufacturing plant, and we thought we might lose the house. Remember that? I nodded. It had been a terrifying time, with Richard unemployed for nearly 9 months during a brutal recession. You went back to work? Full-time at the real estate office, Kevin continued. And you picked up weekend shifts at the department store during the holidays. You were so tired all the time, but you never complained. You just did what needed to be done. He turned to face me at last, his eyes suspiciously bright. You saved us then. You held everything together until Dad found a new job. I never forgot. That. I waited, unsure where this reminiscence was leading. When I came to you with the business idea, part of me thought, this is my chance to pay it back, to make enough money that you'd never have to worry again. He laughed humorlessly. Ironic, isn't it? I ended up putting your financial security at risk instead. Judge Campbell sat silently, allowing this unexpected moment to unfold without intervention. I didn't call you a burden because I believe that, Kevin said, his voice dropping to nearly a whisper. I said it because I was terrified. Terrified of what your stroke meant, of how our lives would change, of whether I could be the kind of son you deserved. Fear explains, I replied softly. Doesn't excuse. I know. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my throat tighten. The thing is, once I said those words, I couldn't take them back. And then it became easier to double down, to convince myself you were confused about our agreement, that the stroke had affected your memory. Because the alternative was facing what I'd done, how I'd failed you. And the company restructuring? I asked. Moving assets to Horizon Global? Kevin had the grace to look ashamed. A contingency plan. It was Donovan's idea, starting about a year ago when the 5-year mark was approaching. He said it was standard business practice, just protecting the company's interests. But I knew what it really was. A silence stretched between us, filled with decades of love and disappointment and everything in between. I'm not going to fight you on this anymore, Mom, Kevin finally said. You deserve your 30%. It's yours by right, by agreement, and by every measure of fairness. He hesitated. I just hope we can find a way forward as a family, somehow. I studied my son's face, searching for signs of manipulation or insincerity. But all I saw was exhaustion and regret, the expression of a man who had finally run out of justifications for his actions. Why the change? I asked cautiously. Kevin sighed deeply. Ethan asked me last week why Grandma never visits anymore. When I tried to explain, all I could hear was how hollow my excuses sounded. My 12-year-old son saw through me in about 30 seconds. He shook his head ruefully. Kids have a way of cutting to the truth, don't they? Judge Campbell cleared, his throat gently. Mrs. Mackenzie, would you like me to bring the attorneys back in to discuss how we might formalize Mr. Mackenzie's acknowledgement of your ownership stake? I considered the question carefully. The vindication I had sought was being offered, but something still felt unresolved. Not yet. Need to understand. What 30% means now? Practically. Kevin looked surprised. What do you mean? Daily operations, decision-making, my role. Each word was chosen deliberately, my post-stroke speech forcing an economy of language that cut to the heart of the matter. I hadn't thought that far ahead, Kevin admitted. I assumed you wouldn't want operational involvement, especially now with your recovery. Not operations, I clarified. Oversight, board seat, quarterly reports, respect. Understanding dawned in my son's eyes. This wasn't just about the money, it was about acknowledgement, recognition that I had been and continued to be an integral part of Horizon's story. Of course, he said quietly. A board seat at minimum, full financial transparency, and, he hesitated before continuing, a formal acknowledgement of your founding role in the company history and marketing materials. The last part was unexpected, a gesture that went beyond legal obligation to address the deeper wound, my erasure from the company narrative. Judge Campbell watched our exchange with evident approval. It sounds like we're making progress. Shall we invite the attorneys back to capture these points? As the others returned and the formal negotiations resumed, I felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Kevin's attorneys, taking cues from their client, adopted a markedly more cooperative tone. Specific terms were discussed, not just the 30% ownership stake, but how it would be documented, how company governance would incorporate my voice, how historical records would be amended to accurately reflect my contribution. By late afternoon, we had the framework of an agreement. I would receive my 30% ownership in both Horizon Technologies and Horizon Global. I would have a seat on the board of directors, which Lisa could occupy during my recovery. The company website and marketing materials would be updated to include my role as a founding investor. And most importantly, Kevin would make a public statement acknowledging the truth, not just to correct the record, but to counteract the rumors he had spread about my mental capacity following the stroke. As the meeting concluded, Judge Campbell congratulated all parties on reaching a resolution. Kevin approached me hesitantly, uncertain of his welcome. Thank you, he said simply, for believing in me when no one else did. for fighting for what's right now, and for being willing to find a path forward, even after everything. I nodded, accepting his words without rushing to absolve him. Reconciliation would be a process, not an event. Trust, once broken, could be rebuilt, but it would take time and consistent action. Ethan and Mia miss you, he added softly. When you're feeling up to it, they'd love to visit. The mention of my grandchildren brought the first genuine smile to my face that day. I'd like that. As Lisa and I prepared to leave, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: satisfaction at the outcome, exhaustion from the ordeal, lingering, sadness for the damage done to our family bonds. But underneath it all was something new, something I hadn't expected, a sense of possibility. For 73 years, I had defined myself primarily through my relationships: daughter, wife, mother, grandmother. Even my professional identity as a real estate agent had been secondary to these roles. Now, standing at what most would consider the end of life's journey, I found myself facing an unexpected beginning. You know what this means, don't you? Lisa asked as we settled into the transport van for the return trip to Cedar Pines. You're a millionaire now, Mom. A company owner, a board member. I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but she was right. My 30% stake in Horizon made me wealthy by any standard. More than that, it made me something I had never been before, a woman of independent means and influence. What will you do? Lisa pressed gently. After rehabilitation, I mean. The question hung in the air, tantalizing in its openness. What would I do with this unexpected third act? The possibilities seemed suddenly vast and varied. First, get better, I said, my practical nature asserting itself. Then learn business, technology, company operations. Lisa laughed. Mom, the tech mogul. I love it. I smiled at her enthusiasm, but my thoughts were already racing ahead. If I was to take my board position seriously, I needed to understand the industry, the market, the products Horizon created. At 68, with a partially paralyzed body and still recovering speech, I would need to master concepts and technologies that hadn't existed for most of my life. The challenge was daunting. It was also exhilarating. Back at Cedar Pines, I shared the day's outcome with the staff members who had become my cheerleaders and confidants. Their joy was genuine, their pride in my achievement touching. We need to celebrate, declared Brenda, my physical therapist. This calls for something special. The recreation director, a young man named Marcus with boundless energy, immediately began planning an impromptu party. Within an hour, the common room had been decorated with streamers, a sheet cake procured from the cafeteria, and a banner hastily created on the facility's computer that read, "Congratulations, Jan," in bold letters. As residents and staff gathered to celebrate with me, I was struck by the realization that 3 months ago, these people had been strangers. Now they felt like essential parts of my world. Brenda, with her no-nonsense encouragement. Dr. Patel, who had been the first to believe my recovery could exceed expectations. Marcus, whose infectious optimism brightened even the most challenging therapy days. Rosa, the night nurse who sat with me during bouts of insomnia, sharing stories of her grandmother in El Salvador. This community had formed around me when I needed it most, when my own family had faltered. They had seen me at my most vulnerable and had never once treated me as a burden. Speech, someone called, followed by good-natured laughter given my condition. I raised my hand to quiet the room, determined to say a few words despite my limitations. Thank you, I began carefully. Not just for tonight, for everything. For seeing me as person, not patient. For believing in my recovery. For becoming family. The simple words brought tears to several eyes. Dr. Patel raised his paper, cup of sparkling cider, to John, he toasted, who reminds us that it's never too late for justice, for healing, or for new beginnings. As the celebration continued around me, I found myself contemplating those new beginnings. The mediation had secured my financial future and professional recognition, but there was more recovery ahead. Physical, emotional, relational. There was also possibility, the chance to define myself anew in this unexpected chapter of life. 2 days later, Carol visited again, this time bringing a sleek laptop computer as a gift. "I thought you might need this," she explained. "For research, for learning about the company, for staying connected." I accepted the gift with genuine appreciation. "Thank you. Been thinking about online courses, business fundamentals, software basics." Carol's eyebrows rose. "Online courses? Jan, you never cease to amaze me. Most people your age, our age, would be content to cash the dividend checks and leave the business to others." "Not my way," I replied simply. And it wasn't. Richard had always teased me about my need to understand how things worked, calling me his curious cat. When we'd bought our first home, I'd insisted on learning about the heating system, the electrical panel, the property tax assessment process. When we'd made investments, I'd researched each company thoroughly, wanting to know not just the projected returns, but the underlying business model. Why would this be any different? If I was to be a 30% owner of Horizon Technologies, I needed to understand what Horizon Technologies actually did. That evening, I began my education. With Lisa's help setting up the laptop, I navigated to Horizon's website, studying the company's products and services. I created accounts on various learning platforms, bookmarking courses on business fundamentals, corporate governance, and basic software concepts. I even found a support group for stroke survivors returning to professional work, their stories of determination and adaptation resonating deeply with my own experience. A week later, I received another visitor, Melissa, arriving alone and unannounced during afternoon visiting hours. She looked nervous, clutching her handbag tightly as she hovered in the doorway of my room. "Jan," she began hesitantly. "I hope I'm not intruding." I gestured for her to enter, curious about what had brought my daughter-in-law here on her own. Melissa sat perched on the edge of the visitor's chair, reminiscent of Carol's posture during her apology visit. "I wanted to say how sorry I am," she said without preamble. "For everything, for not standing up for you more forcefully, for letting Kevin treat you the way he did, for not bringing the children to visit." Her apology seemed sincere, her discomfort genuine. I waited, giving her space to continue. "The truth is, I was caught in the middle. I knew what Kevin was doing wasn't right, but challenging him directly would have meant." She trailed off, perhaps realizing how self-serving her explanation sounded. "Would have meant conflict," I finished, for her. "Difficult position." Melissa nodded gratefully. "Yes, exactly. But that's no excuse. I should have been stronger, especially after your stroke when you were most vulnerable." She twisted her wedding ring nervously. "Ethan and Mia have been asking about you constantly. They miss their grandmother." The mention of my grandchildren softened something in me. They were innocent in all this, blameless for their parents' actions. "Bring them. Tomorrow," I suggested. "After school?" Melissa's face brightened immediately. "Really? You'd want that? They would be thrilled." I nodded. "Miss them too." As promised, Melissa brought the children the following afternoon. Ethan, now 12 and on the cusp of adolescence, approached. With typical preteen awkwardness, unsure how to interact with this new version of his grandmother. Mia, 8 and uninhibited, launched herself toward me before her mother could caution her about my condition. "Grandma!" she exclaimed, stopping just short of the hug she clearly wanted to give. "You look different. Does your arm still not work, right?" I appreciated her directness. "Right side." Still weak, I explained, but improving. Can hug. Gently. Permission granted, Mia carefully wrapped her arms around me, mindful of my right side. Mom says you had a clot in your brain that made some parts stop working, but you're getting better because you work really hard in therapy. That's right, I confirmed, touched by her understanding. Like exercise, for my brain and body. Ethan approached more cautiously. Hey, Grandma, he said, his voice caught in that in-between stage, occasionally cracking. You talk different. Ethan, Melissa admonished, but I waved away her concern. It's okay. Yes, stroke affected. A speech. Words come slower, but thoughts. Still clear. That must be frustrating, he observed with surprising insight. Like when you know what you want to say but can't get it out right. Exactly, I agreed, impressed by his perception. Very frustrating sometimes. Dad says you're going to be on the company board now, Ethan continued, changing subjects with the randomness typical of his age. He says you own like a third of Horizon. I glanced at Melissa, who shrugged slightly. Kevin has been more open with the children since the mediation, she explained. He's trying to set a better example. Yes, I confirmed for Ethan. 30% owner, board member. My grandson seemed to consider this carefully. So you're kind of Dad's boss now? That's cool. I couldn't help laughing at his simplification. Not boss, partner, different. The visit continued pleasantly, with Mia showing me her latest art projects via photos on Melissa's phone, and Ethan reluctantly but thoroughly explaining his science fair project on renewable energy. As they prepared to leave, Ethan lingered behind as Melissa helped Mia put on her coat. Grandma, he said, quietly. Dad feels really bad about what happened. He doesn't say it exactly, but I can tell. He gets this look when people mention you, like he's sad and guilty at the same time. Out of the mouths of babes, I thought. Growing up is learning from mistakes, I told him. Your dad is still growing. Ethan nodded solemnly. Yeah, I guess we all are. After they left, I sat by the window, watching the December twilight settle over the grounds of Cedar Pines. Snow had begun to fall, transforming the view into a peaceful winter tableau. The visit had stirred complex emotions, joy at reconnecting with my grandchildren, cautious hope for healing in my relationship with Melissa, lingering sadness for all that had been lost in the rupture with Kevin. But beneath these swirling feelings was something solid and new, a foundation of self-determination I had never fully claimed before. In standing up for myself, in refusing to be erased or diminished, I had discovered a strength I hadn't known I possessed. The stroke, for all its devastation, had paradoxically freed me from old patterns and expectations. My phone chimed with a notification, an email from Judith Kleinman. The formal settlement agreement had been drafted and was ready for my review. Attached was also the press release Kevin had prepared, acknowledging my founding role in Horizon Technologies, to be distributed the following week. I opened the document and began to read, taking my time with each word, each clause. This wasn't just a legal victory or a financial windfall. It was the beginning of my journey of self-discovery, a journey that had begun in the most unexpected way, with a stroke, a betrayal, and 3 words that would change everything. Just a burden. As I read Kevin's carefully crafted acknowledgement of my contribution, I thought about the months ahead. There would be more rehabilitation, more learning, more rebuilding of relationships. There would be board meetings to attend, financial reports to analyze, corporate decisions to influence. There would be challenges I couldn't yet imagine and opportunities I had never dreamed possible. At 68, with half my body still relearning basic functions, I was stepping into a new identity. Not just mother, not just stroke survivor, but businesswoman, investor, decision maker. The path forward would not be easy, but for the first time in decades, it would be truly mine. The snow continued to fall outside my window, covering the landscape in a pristine blanket of white. A clean slate, a fresh start, just like the one I had been unexpectedly, painfully, wondrously given. Spring arrived in Cedar Ridge with a burst of color and warmth that mirrored the progress in my recovery. 4 months into my rehabilitation, at Cedar Pines, I had graduated from a wheelchair to a walker, and my speech, while still deliberate, had improved dramatically. The aphasia that had initially made word-finding so difficult had receded, allowing me to express more complex thoughts without the frustrating pauses and substitutions that had characterized my early post-stroke communication. My medical team was discussing discharge plans, suggesting I might be able to return home with part-time assistance within the next month. The prospect filled me with both anticipation and trepidation. While I longed for the privacy and familiarity of my own space, I had grown accustomed to the structured environment of Cedar Pines, the ready availability of help, the community that had embraced me during my most vulnerable time. "You've made remarkable progress, Mrs. Mackenzie," Dr. Patel said during his morning rounds. "Better than I would have predicted given the severity of your initial deficits. Your determination has been truly impressive." I smiled at the compliment. "I had good motivation," I replied, thinking of the journey that had brought me here. Not just the physical recovery, but the reclaiming of my dignity, my worth, my voice. "Well, whatever your motivation, it's working. I believe you're ready to transition to outpatient therapy. Of course, you'll still need some assistance at home initially." The practical questions of my discharge loomed large. My condo had stairs, narrow doorways, a bathtub without grab bars, all potential hazards for someone with my limitations. Modifications would be needed, arrangements made for home health aides, transportation to outpatient therapy sessions. Lisa had offered to extend her leave of absence from work to help with the transition, but I was reluctant to keep her away from her life in Seattle any longer. She had already sacrificed so much over the past months, putting her career and relationship on hold to advocate for me. As I contemplated these challenges, my phone pinged with a notification. It was a calendar reminder for the quarterly board meeting of Horizon Technologies scheduled for the following week, my first as an official board member. Though I had been receiving financial reports and updates since the settlement, this would be my formal introduction to the company's leadership team and my first opportunity to directly engage with its governance. Kevin had suggested I might want to delay my board participation until I was further along in my recovery, but I had insisted on attending, even if only virtually. This was, after all, what I had fought for, not just ownership on paper, but a voice in the company's direction. I was reviewing the board materials on my laptop when Carol arrived for her regular Thursday visit, arms laden with fresh flowers and a bag from my favorite bakery. "Preparing for your corporate debut?" she asked, nodding toward the screen where I was studying Horizon's latest product launch details. "Trying to," I admitted. "So much to learn. New terminology, new concepts." Carol arranged the flowers in a vase while I navigated through the dense financial projections for the coming fiscal year. "You know, most people our age are downsizing their responsibilities, not taking on new corporate roles," she observed. With a smile, I looked up from the screen. "Most people our age haven't had their lives turned upside down by a stroke and a betrayal." "Touché," Carol acknowledged, "though I must say, the upheaval seems to agree with you. There's a spark in you now that I haven't seen in years, not since before Richard passed." Her observation gave me pause. Was she right? Had I, despite the trauma of the stroke and the pain of Kevin's betrayal, somehow become more vibrant, more engaged with life? The thought was startling, yet I couldn't deny the underlying truth. For all its challenges, this new chapter had awakened something in me that had long been dormant, a sense of purpose, of agency, of possibility. "Life's full of surprises," I said finally. "Not all of them welcome, but some. Instructive. As Carol was leaving, she paused at the door. "Oh, I nearly forgot. I ran into Kevin at the grocery store yesterday. He mentioned something about a house he wanted you to look at. Said he'd be calling you about it." I frowned, puzzled. Kevin? And I had maintained a careful, cordial distance since the settlement. Our interactions had been limited to necessary communications about the company and brief, somewhat stilted visits with the grandchildren. The idea that he was looking at houses for me was unexpected and slightly unsettling. Sure enough, Kevin called that evening as I was finishing dinner. "Mom," he began after the obligatory inquiries about my health, "Dr. Patel mentioned you might be discharged soon, and I've been thinking about your living situation." I tensed slightly. "I have a home, Kevin, my condo." "I know, but it's not really suitable for someone in your condition. The stairs, the small bathroom, the distance from medical facilities." Though his concerns mirrored my own private worries, I bristled at his presumption. "I'm having modifications made, grab bars installed, a stair lift is being considered." Kevin sighed, a sound I recognized from countless past disagreements. "Mom, those are Band-Aid solutions. What you need is a home designed for accessibility from the ground up. I appreciate your concern, but..." "Please," he interrupted, "just look at this place before you decide. It's a ranch-style home in Willow Creek, that new development near the hospital. One floor, wide doorways, roll-in shower, everything you'd need. It's even got a mother-in-law suite with a separate entrance where you could have live-in help if necessary." His description made the house sound like an elaborate medical facility rather than a home. "Kevin, I can't afford a new house, especially in Willow Creek. Those properties start at $500,000. There was a pause before he replied. "That's not an issue. I've already put down a deposit." The statement hung between us, loaded with implications. "You bought a house for me without consulting me?" I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "Not exactly." Another pause. "I bought it for us. You, me, Melissa, the kids. It's big enough for everyone." I nearly dropped the phone. "You want us to live together? After everything that's happened?" "I want us to be a family again," Kevin said, an uncharacteristic vulnerability in his voice. "I want to make things right. And yes, I want to make sure you have the care you need without having to rely on strangers." The irony wasn't lost on me. The son who had called me a burden now proposing to take me into his home. What had changed? Was this genuine remorse? A desire for redemption? Or was it about appearances, about repairing his image in the community as word of our conflict had spread? "This is unexpected," I said carefully. "I need time to think about it." "Of course," Kevin replied quickly. "No pressure. But at least come see the place. I could pick you up tomorrow afternoon just for a quick tour." Against my better judgment, I agreed. After hanging up, I sat by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Kevin's offer stirred conflicting emotions: wariness, hope, confusion. After fighting so hard for independence, was I willing to consider an arrangement that might compromise that hard-won freedom? Yet the practical challenges of living alone with my limitations were real, as was my longing to be close to my grandchildren. The next day, Kevin arrived precisely at the time we had agreed upon, driving a new SUV I hadn't seen before. He helped me navigate from my walker to the passenger seat with an attentiveness that felt both foreign and familiar. Foreign because such solicitousness had rarely been part of our relationship. Familiar because it echoed Richard's care during my previous illnesses. "You're looking well, Mom," he said as we drove through town toward the Willow Creek development. "Your speech is much clearer." "Better every day," I agreed. "Still have trouble with complex sentences when tired." Kevin nodded. "I've been reading about stroke recovery. It's amazing how the brain can rewire itself, form new pathways around the damaged areas." This was new. Kevin researching my condition, educating himself about the challenges I faced. In the months immediately following my stroke, he had seemed almost deliberately ignorant about the details of my impairments, as if not knowing allowed him to maintain distance. The house, when we arrived, was undeniably impressive. Situated on a generous corner lot with mature trees, it featured a wide, welcoming front porch accessible by a gently sloping ramp disguised as an architectural feature. Inside, the open floor plan, lever door handles, and absence of thresholds between rooms would make navigation with a walker or wheelchair straightforward. "This would be your suite," Kevin explained, leading me to a wing off the main living area. Bedroom, private. Bathroom, sitting room that could double as an office. You'd have your own entrance and patio, but also be connected to the main house for meals and family time. The space was beautiful, sunny, spacious, thoughtfully designed. I could envision myself here, reading in the bay window, working at the built-in desk, entertaining visitors in the comfortable sitting area. Yet something about the way Kevin presented it, the careful emphasis on independence with independence, struck a discordant note. "It's lovely," I acknowledged, running my hand along the smooth granite countertop of the kitchenette. "But Kevin, this is a major decision, moving in together after everything." My son's expression tightened momentarily, before relaxing, into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I know it would be an adjustment, for all of us. But I truly believe it could be good, Mom. For you, for me, for the kids especially." We continued the tour, Kevin pointing out features clearly, chosen with my needs in mind. The therapeutic spa tub, the easy-access kitchen cabinets, the emergency call system. The attention to detail suggested long planning, not an impulsive decision. "How long have you been considering this?" I asked as we settled in the sunroom overlooking a meticulously landscaped backyard. Kevin hesitated. "Honestly, since your stroke, I started looking at properties right away, thinking we'd need a better solution than your condo. The timing wasn't right then, with everything that happened between us, but I never stopped believing this was the best path forward." His answer surprised me. Even as he had been fighting me legally, denying my claim to Horizon, he had been planning for my long-term care? The contradiction was difficult to reconcile. "Why, Kevin?" I asked directly. "After calling me a burden, after trying to erase my contribution to your company, why this grand gesture now?" My son flinched at the word burden, his gaze dropping to his hands. "I've done a lot of thinking these past months about what kind of man I want to be, what example I want to set for Ethan and Mia. The truth is, I'm ashamed of how I behaved, not just the legal fight, but the years before that, taking you for granted, minimizing your role in my success." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I can't change the past, but I can try to make the present better, to build a different kind of future. This house, it's not just about your physical needs. It's about rebuilding our family, creating a home where we all have our place." The sincerity in his voice was compelling, yet I couldn't quiet the voice of caution in my mind. This was the same son who had manipulated, deceived, and belittled me. Could people truly change so fundamentally? Or was this another form of control, cloaked in the language of care and reconciliation? "I appreciate the thought behind this, Kevin," I said carefully. "But living together would be complicated. There are dynamics between us that wouldn't simply disappear because we share an address." Kevin nodded, unsurprised by my reservation. "I know, I'm not expecting an immediate yes. Just think about it. The house will be ready next month. We can move. Slowly, maybe start with a trial period. If it doesn't work, no harm done. You still have your condo." As we prepared to leave, Kevin received a phone call that he stepped away to take. While waiting, I wandered onto the back patio, imagining summer evenings here, watching Ethan and Mia play in the yard, perhaps entertaining friends on the spacious deck. It was an appealing vision, yet incomplete somehow, missing an essential element I couldn't quite identify. The ride back to Cedar Pines was quieter, both of us lost in our thoughts. As Kevin helped me from the car to my walker, he hesitated before speaking again. "There's something else I should mention, Mom. Something that might factor into your decision." I waited, noting the sudden tension in his posture. "Horizon is expanding. New offices in Austin and Denver opening this summer. As CEO, I'll need to be heavily involved in getting them established." "That means travel," I surmised. "Extensive travel," he confirmed, "at least for the next year or so. Melissa will be handling things at home, but with her going back to work full-time at the high school, it's going to be challenging." And there it was, the missing piece in the beautiful vision of family togetherness. Kevin wouldn't be present much at all. The grand house, the multi-generational living, the rebuilding of relationships, all of it underpinned by a practical need for someone to help Melissa with the children during his absences. "I see," I said simply. Kevin must have read the realization in my expression. "That's not the main reason for wanting you to move in," he insisted. "It's a factor, yes, but not the driving force." I didn't contradict him, but the revelation cast his proposal in a different light. However genuine his remorse might be, however sincere his desire for reconciliation, the timing of his offer was inextricably linked to his own needs. The pattern was familiar. Kevin reaching out when he required something, pulling back when his needs were met. "I'll think about it," I promised as we said goodbye at Cedar Pines. "There's much to consider." That evening, I shared the development with Lisa during our daily video call. Her reaction was immediate and unequivocal. "Absolutely not," she declared, her image pixelating slightly with the vehemence of her response. "After everything he's put you through? And now he wants you to be live-in childcare while he gallivants around the country opening new offices? It's absurd." I smiled at her protective outrage. "It's not quite that simple. The house is truly lovely, perfectly designed for my needs, and being close to Ethan and Mia would be wonderful. Mom, there are other solutions. We could modify your condo, hire help. Explore senior communities with accessibility features. You don't need to make yourself dependent on Kevin and Melissa." Her concerns echoed my own misgivings, yet something in me, some residual maternal instinct perhaps, wanted to believe in the possibility of redemption, of a healed family circle. What if this is his way of making amends? I mused. People can change, learn from their mistakes. Lisa's expression softened. Of course they can, but genuine change is demonstrated through consistent actions over time, not grand gestures when they happen to align with self-interest. Her words struck a chord, articulating the unease I had felt but couldn't quite name. Kevin's offer, however, beautiful the house, however sincere his expressed remorse, came at a moment when it served his purposes. Had he made the same proposal 6 months earlier, when my need was greatest but his travel plans not yet crystallized, it might have carried more weight. Over the next few days, I found myself mentally revisiting the house, imagining life there from different angles. In some scenarios, it was idyllic, family dinners in the spacious dining room, helping Ethan with his homework in the sunny office, teaching Mia to bake in the accessible kitchen. In others, it was stifling, navigating unspoken tensions with Melissa being expected to fill childcare gaps while Kevin traveled, having my independence subtly but steadily eroded by the dynamics of living in their home, regardless of my name on a deed. I was still weighing these possibilities when an unexpected visit changed the equation entirely. It was late afternoon, and I was preparing for my first virtual board meeting when a knock came at my door. Opening it, I found Melissa standing. There, her expression a complex mix of determination and discomfort. "Jan," she said without preamble, "may I speak with you privately?" Intrigued, I gestured her inside. She declined my offer of tea, perching tensely on the edge of the visitor's chair, much as she had during her apology visit months earlier. "Kevin told me he showed you the house," she began after a moment. "That he's asked you to consider moving in with us." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "He says you're still thinking about it, which is why I'm here." She took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "I need to be honest with you, Jan. This living arrangement, it wasn't my idea. In fact, I tried to talk Kevin out of it." The admission wasn't entirely surprising, given the strained nature of our relationship, but her directness was unexpected. "Kevin believes this grand gesture will somehow fix everything, the damage to your relationship, the public embarrassment, to the family, the awkwardness that now exists between all of us. He thinks sharing a home will force a kind of proximity healing." She shook her head slightly. "I think that's naive at best, potentially disastrous at worst." "Why tell me this?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Wouldn't it be easier to maintain a united front with Kevin?" Melissa's gaze met mine directly. "Because you deserve the truth. Because making this decision based on false assumptions would set all of us up for failure. And because, despite everything, I respect you too much to let you walk into a situation that isn't what it appears to be." Her candor was refreshing, if somewhat startling. This was a side of Melissa I had rarely glimpsed during our years as in-laws: direct, unvarnished, pragmatic. "The thing is," she continued, "I don't think Kevin has fully processed his own motivations. He genuinely believes he's doing this for the right reasons: atonement, family healing, proper care for you. But the subtext is clear to anyone paying attention. He needs help while he's building his professional legacy, and you're the most convenient solution." The assessment was harsh, but aligned with my own suspicions. "And you?" I asked. "What do you need, Melissa?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She blinked rapidly, momentarily at a loss for words. "What do I need?" she repeated, as if the concept were foreign. "I need peace, stability for the children, a home that feels like a sanctuary, not a stage for ongoing family drama." "And you don't believe my presence would contribute to that peace?" Melissa sighed, her shoulders dropping slightly. "It's not about you personally, Jan. It's about the history between you and Kevin, the unresolved feelings on both sides. Living together would force a kind of superficial harmony, without addressing the deeper issues. For a while, everyone would be on their best behavior. Then the real patterns would emerge, except now we'd all be trapped under one roof." Her analysis was insightful, and I had to admit, probably accurate. The wounds between Kevin and me were still too fresh, the trust too recently rebuilt to withstand the daily friction of shared living space. And Melissa, caught in the middle, would bear the brunt of any renewed conflict. "I appreciate your honesty," I said finally. "It can't have been easy to come here, to speak so frankly against your husband's wishes." "Kevin doesn't know I'm here," she admitted. "He wouldn't understand why I felt this conversation was necessary. He'd see it as undermining him when really, I'm trying to prevent all of us from making a mistake we'd regret." We sat in silence for a moment, the late afternoon sunlight casting long shadows across the room. For the first time, I saw Melissa clearly, not as an extension of Kevin, not as the somewhat distant daughter-in-law who had taken his side during our conflict, but as a woman trying to navigate complex family dynamics while protecting her own core needs. "What would you prefer?" I asked. "If the decision were entirely yours?" Melissa considered the question thoughtfully. "I think we need more time, more gradual steps toward rebuilding trust and comfort with each other. Start with regular family dinners, perhaps weekend visits. See how those go before committing to shared living space." Her suggestion was eminently reasonable, a measured approach that acknowledged both the desire for reconciliation and the reality of our still healing relationships. I think you're right, I said, reaching a decision that had been forming even before her visit. Moving in together now would be premature, potentially damaging to the progress we've made. Relief flickered across Melissa's features. You'll decline then. I'll suggest an alternative. Perhaps Kevin could help me find a smaller, accessible house nearby, close enough for regular contact with the family, but with the independence we all still need. Melissa nodded, visibly relaxing. That sounds perfect. Close but separate. Room to breathe, room to grow back together at a pace that feels right for everyone. As she prepared to leave, Melissa hesitated at the door. Jan, I hope you know that despite everything, I do care about you. I want you in the children's lives, in our lives. Just in a way that's healthy for everyone. The sentiment, simply expressed, touched me more deeply than Kevin's grand gesture of the house. Here was authenticity, a clear-eyed assessment of where we stood and what might be possible. I know, I assured her, and I appreciate your coming here today. It can't have been easy. After Melissa left, I settled at my desk to prepare for the board meeting, my mind still processing our conversation. There was something fitting about the timing, making this personal decision about independence just before participating in my first official Horizon board meeting, claiming my place at the governance table of the company I had helped create. The meeting itself went smoothly, more ceremonial than substantive for me given my still developing understanding of the business. Kevin introduced me formally to the other board members, 3 investors, 2 industry experts, and the company's CFO. Though my contributions were limited to basic questions and observations, the mere fact of my presence seemed significant, a visible reminder of the company's founding story and my role in it. Afterward, Kevin called to see how I felt about the experience. It went well, I told him. Everyone was welcoming. I have much to learn, but it's a start. You'll catch up quickly, he assured me. Finance was always your strong suit, even when we were growing up. I remember how you managed the household budget, made those small investments that consistently outperformed Dad's bolder ones. The observation was accurate, but surprising coming from Kevin, who had rarely acknowledged my financial acumen before. Speaking of investments, I segued carefully, I've been thinking about your housing proposal. And? The eagerness in his voice was palpable. It's a beautiful property, Kevin, thoughtfully designed, perfect for someone with my needs. But I don't think moving in together is the right step for us right now. There was a pause before he responded. May I ask why? I chose my words carefully, not wanting to reveal Melissa's visit while still honoring the insights it had provided. We're still finding our way back to each other after a difficult period. Living together would add pressure that might undermine our progress. Mom, I understand your concerns, but this house would give you independence within a family setting. The separate suite, your own entrance. It's not about the physical layout, I interrupted gently. It's about where we are emotionally, relationally. We need more time, more gradual steps. Kevin's sigh carried through the phone line. Is this Lisa's influence? She's never fully understood our family dynamic, living so far away all these years. The attempt to attribute my decision to outside influence rather than my own judgment was telling, a subtle reminder of the patterns that had characterized our relationship for too long. This is my decision, Kevin, made after careful consideration of what would be best for everyone, including you and Melissa and the children. I paused before offering the alternative I had discussed with Melissa. However, I would appreciate your help finding a smaller, accessible home nearby. Close enough for regular involvement with the family, but with the independence I need at this stage. There was a longer silence this time, and I could almost hear him weighing his response, calculating how to salvage some version of his plan. If that's what you truly want, he finally conceded, though his tone suggested he remained unconvinced. "We can start looking at properties in the area. There's actually a smaller ranch-style home in the same development as the house I showed you. It might be worth considering." The conversation shifted to practical matters: my upcoming discharge from Cedar Pines, the modifications needed for my condo in the interim, the schedule for outpatient therapy. Throughout, I could sense Kevin adjusting to this recalibration of expectations, this assertion of my independence that ran counter to his vision of family reunification on his terms. After we hung up, I found myself thinking about the parallel tracks my life had taken since the stroke, the physical recovery that had restored much of my function, and the emotional journey that had redefined my relationships and sense of self. In both realms, progress had come not from dramatic leaps, but from consistent, intentional steps forward. Not from grand gestures like Kevin's house offer, but from the accumulation of small choices that honored my needs and boundaries. The next morning, I received a text from Melissa. "Thank you." Just those 2 words, but they conveyed volumes about her relief, her appreciation for a decision that respected the complexity of our family situation. Later that day, during my physical therapy session, Brenda noticed a new confidence in my movements, a greater willingness to push beyond comfortable limits. "Something's changed," she observed, as I completed a challenging balance exercise. "You seem more settled, more determined." I smiled, realizing she was right. Yesterday's decisions, declining Kevin's housing proposal, participating in my first board meeting, recognizing the wisdom in Melissa's candor, had shifted something fundamental within me. The path forward was clearer now, defined by my own choices rather than others' expectations. "I know where I'm going," I told Brenda simply. "And it's not where anyone else planned for me." She nodded approvingly. "The best recoveries happen that way, when the patient takes ownership, charts their own course. The body follows where the mind leads." As spring blossomed fully around Cedar Pines, my discharge date was set for the following month. Lisa would come for the transition, staying for 2 weeks to help me settle back into my condo with its newly installed accessibility features. After that, a part-time aide would assist with tasks still beyond my capability, and outpatient therapy would continue 3 times weekly. Kevin, true to his word despite his disappointment, had arranged for me to tour the smaller ranch home in Willow Creek. It was indeed a potential solution for the longer term: accessible, manageable in size, close enough to the family for regular involvement without the complications of shared living space. I would consider it seriously once I was more established in my outpatient routine. Meanwhile, my role at Horizon was gradually expanding beyond ceremonial. I had begun reviewing the company's financial structures in detail, asking questions that sometimes surprised the CFO with their perceptiveness. Kevin, to his credit, seemed genuinely pleased by my engagement, introducing me to key team members and ensuring I received comprehensive briefings before each decision point. One evening, as I packed some personal items in preparation for my eventual discharge, I came across a photograph I had forgotten: Richard and me on our 30th anniversary, standing on a beach in Maui, the sunset painting the sky behind us in brilliant oranges and pinks. Richard's arm was around my waist, and we were both laughing at some forgotten joke, our faces alight with simple joy. Looking at our younger selves, I was struck by how content we appeared, how confident in our shared life. Richard had always encouraged my independence, my intellectual curiosity, my financial prudence. He had never seen me as an extension of himself, but as a full partner, bringing my own strengths to our marriage. "You would be proud," I whispered to his image. "Not of what happened with Kevin. That would break your heart. But of how I've found my way through it, how I've refused to be diminished." The photograph seemed to capture a moment of perfect equilibrium. 2 people whole in themselves yet stronger together. It was that equilibrium I was seeking now, not just in my physical recovery but in my relationships, my role in the company, my place in the world, the stroke that had nearly killed me, the son who had called me a burden, the business that had forgotten who funded its beginnings. All of these had threatened to erase me, to render me invisible. Instead, they had become the catalysts for a reclamation, a rediscovery of self that might never have happened otherwise. As I carefully placed the photograph in the box of items to take home, I felt a deep gratitude for this unexpected journey. Not for the pain or the betrayal, but for the clarity they had ultimately brought. The recognition that even at 68, even after a devastating stroke, I was not finished becoming who I was meant to be. The day I moved back into my condo was bright with early summer sunshine. Lisa had arranged everything with military precision. The newly installed grab bars gleaming in the bathroom, the stair lift ready to carry me to the second floor, the refrigerator stocked with pre-prepared meals, and a schedule of aid visits posted prominently on the refrigerator. "What do you think?" she asked as she guided me through the front door, my walker thumping softly on the hardwood floors I had chosen 15 years earlier when Richard and I had downsized from the family home. "Will it work?" I looked around at the familiar space, now subtly transformed to accommodate my changed needs. The furniture had been rearranged to create wider pathways, throw rugs removed to prevent tripping, frequently used items relocated to accessible heights. It was still unmistakably my home, but adapted like me to new realities. "It's perfect," I assured her. "Familiar but functional." The transition from cedar pines to independent living came with inevitable challenges. The first night alone, I woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where I was. The silence felt oppressive after months of institutional background noise. The gentle beeping of distant monitors, the squeak of nurses' shoes in the hallway, the murmur of other residents' televisions through the walls. But with each passing day, I reclaimed my routines and spaces. Morning coffee on the small balcony overlooking the community garden. Afternoons spent working through the Horizon financial reports, preparing questions for the next board meeting. Evenings with a book or phone calls with friends who had remained steadfast through my ordeal. 3 times a week, a driver came to take me to outpatient therapy, where I continued the hard work of rebuilding strength, coordination, and speech fluency. My therapists were consistently impressed by my progress, attributing it to determination I hadn't known I possessed before the stroke. "Most patients your age with similar deficits plateau around 6 months post-event," Dr. Patel remarked during a follow-up appointment. "You're continuing to show improvements well beyond that timeline. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." What I was doing, I realized, was living with purpose, not just going through recovery motions, but actively rebuilding a life that mattered to me. Each Horizon board document I mastered, each independent step I took without my walker, each clear sentence I formed without hesitation was a victory not just over the stroke, but over the limitations others had tried to impose on me. Weekends brought family time, Sunday dinners at Kevin and Melissa's, where our interactions gradually became less strained, more natural. Ethan and Mia visited regularly, sometimes staying overnight in the guest room that Lisa had carefully prepared for them. My granddaughter's delight in helping me bake despite my slower movements, my grandson's patient explanation of his latest video game. These simple moments knitted new connections that existed independently of the tensions with their parents. Kevin and I established a cautious new rhythm in our relationship. He had been unexpectedly gracious about my decision to decline his housing offer, redirecting his energy toward helping me consider the smaller accessible home in Willow Creek for the future. In our professional interactions at Horizon, he treated me with a respect that had been absent before, soliciting my input on financial decisions, acknowledging my perspective in board meetings. Whether this represented genuine growth or simply pragmatic adaptation to changed circumstances, I couldn't be entirely sure. But I chose to accept it at face value, to meet his efforts with an open mind while maintaining the boundaries I had worked so hard to establish. One afternoon, about a month after my return home, I received an unexpected visitor. I was reviewing applications for a new home health aide, my previous one having relocated unexpectedly, when the doorbell rang. Opening it, I found a young woman in her early 30s standing there, a portfolio tucked under her arm. "Mrs. Mackenzie?" she asked with a professional smile. "I'm Andrea Chen from the Cedar Ridge Business Journal. I was hoping I might speak with you about your role at Horizon Technologies." I hesitated, surprised by the request. While Kevin had fulfilled his promise to acknowledge my founding role in company materials, we had never discussed media interviews or public profiles. "May I ask what prompted your interest?" I inquired, not yet inviting her in. "We're doing a series on women in business in Cedar Ridge, particularly those who have overcome significant obstacles," Andrea explained. "Your story came up in my research, the stroke, the company ownership revelation, your board position. It's quite compelling." I considered her request carefully. My first instinct was to decline. I had never sought public attention, and the family conflict that had preceded my current position at Horizon was still a sensitive subject. Yet there was value in visibility, in demonstrating that older women, even those facing health challenges, could claim meaningful roles in the business world. "I'd be open to a conversation," I said finally, stepping back to allow her entry. "Though some aspects of the situation remain private family matters." Andrea proved to be a thoughtful interviewer, focusing more on my current contributions to Horizon than the conflict that had preceded them. She asked insightful questions about my perspective as a board member who had seen the company from inception to its current success, about the challenges of assuming such a role after a major health crisis, about my vision for Horizon's future. "One thing that strikes me about your story," she observed as our conversation drew to a close, "is how it upends conventional narratives about aging, especially for women. At a time when many would be scaling back responsibilities, you're embarking on this significant new role." I smiled at her observation. Necessity sometimes reveals capabilities we didn't know we possessed. I never aspired to corporate governance, but now that I'm here, I find it deeply satisfying to help shape the company's direction. "And the stroke?" she asked cautiously. "How has that experience influenced your approach?" I considered the question, wanting to offer something more substantive than platitudes about adversity and strength. "It clarified priorities," I said finally. "When basic functions, speaking, walking, caring for oneself, become challenging, you develop a clearer sense of what matters. In business terms, you might say I became more focused on core metrics, less distracted by peripherals." When the article appeared 2 weeks later, it presented a portrait that balanced accuracy with dignity. The headline, "From Founding Investor to Board Director, Janet Mackenzie's Unexpected Third Act," captured the essence of my journey without sensationalizing the family conflict. Kevin, to my surprise, was the first to call after its publication, his voice warm with what sounded like genuine pride. "You come across wonderfully, Mom," he said, strong but thoughtful. "It's a great piece." "Thank you," I replied, touched by his reaction. I was nervous about it, to be honest, worried it might stir up difficult feelings. There was a pause before he answered. "Those difficult feelings were earned, Mom. I made choices I'm not proud of. The fact that you've been gracious enough not to publicly detail the worst of them, that's more than I deserve." The acknowledgement, simple but direct, felt like another small step in our healing process. Not forgiveness exactly, that would take more time, more consistent evidence of changed behavior, but a mutual recognition of where we had been and where we hoped to go. As summer deepened into fall, my life settled into patterns that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. I declined the small ranch house in Willow Creek, deciding instead to remain in my condo where memories of Richard kept me company and where I had proven I could manage independently with minimal assistance. My speech continued to improve. My reliance on the walker diminished to occasional use on particularly fatiguing days, and my confidence in navigating both physical spaces and boardroom discussions grew steadily. The article in the Business Journal had unexpected ripple effects. I began receiving invitations to speak at local business gatherings, particularly those focused on women entrepreneurs. While public speaking had never been my forte, even before the stroke's impact on my speech, I found these opportunities unexpectedly rewarding. My slower, more deliberate way of talking, once a source of frustration, now lent weight to my words, encouraging audiences to listen more attentively. On a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after my stroke, I stood before the Cedar Ridge Women's Business Alliance, prepared to deliver remarks on resilience and reinvention. Looking out at the audience of women ranging from 20-something entrepreneurs to seasoned executives near my own age, I felt a surge of gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this moment. 1 year ago today, I began, my voice clear. Despite its measured pace, I woke up unable to move the right side of my body or speak intelligibly. In the hospital, I overheard my son call me just a burden, a label that stung far more than the stroke itself. A murmur rippled through the audience. That moment could have defined me, reduced me to exactly what that label suggested. Instead, it became the catalyst for reclaiming not just my health, but my voice, my financial security, and my place in a company I helped create but had been written out of. As I shared my story, the initial investment in Horizon, the broken agreement, the painful family rupture, and the eventual resolution, I watched recognition dawn in many faces. These women, regardless of age or circumstance, understood what it meant to be underestimated, sidelined, or erased. The greatest lesson I've learned, I concluded, is that it's never too late to insist on being seen, on having your contribution valued, on claiming your rightful place at whatever table matters to you. Whether you're 25 or 68, whether you're in perfect health or navigating disability, your worth isn't determined by others' willingness to recognize it. The applause that followed was warm and sustained. Afterward, women lined up to speak with me, many sharing their own experiences of invisibility in professional or family contexts. One elderly woman gripped my hand with surprising strength, tears in her eyes. "My son took over my business 5 years ago," she confided quietly. "Gradually pushed me out of decisions, insisted I was confused when I questioned his changes. I thought it was just me, that maybe I was too old to understand modern business practices. But hearing your story, maybe I'm not confused. Maybe I'm just inconvenient." I squeezed her hand in return. "Trust yourself," I urged. "Your experience matters, your knowledge matters, and it's never too late to reclaim what's yours." Driving home from the event, I reflected on how profoundly my life had changed in a single year. The stroke that might have diminished me had instead revealed strength I hadn't known I possessed. The son who had called me a burden had been forced to recognize my essential contribution to his success. The company that had tried to erase me now featured my founding role prominently in its corporate narrative. None of it had come easily. The physical recovery demanded daily effort, disciplined exercises, endless repetition of movements and sounds that had once been automatic. The legal battle for recognition had required courage, persistence, and the willingness to risk family relationships for the sake of justice. The adaptation to my new role as a board member had meant countless hours studying business concepts, technology platforms, market trends that had not been part of my previous life experience. Yet here I was, speaking publicly, influencing corporate decisions, living independently, and perhaps most importantly, defining myself rather than allowing others to define me. Not just surviving after my stroke, but thriving because of how it had clarified what mattered, what I was capable of, who I truly was. As I pulled into my condo's parking space, my phone chimed with a text message from Lisa. "So proud of you, Mom. Dad would be too." The simple words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Yes, Richard would have been proud, not of the circumstances that had necessitated this journey, but of how I had navigated it. He had always believed in me, even when I hadn't fully believed in myself. Inside my condo, I moved with the careful but confident gait that had replaced my earlier walker-dependent shuffle. Making tea in the kitchen, where adaptive tools now made one-handed tasks manageable, I gazed out at the community garden where autumn flowers still bloomed defiantly against the cooling temperatures. Life, I reflected, had its seasons. This unexpected autumn flowering of my capabilities, my confidence, my sense of purpose. It wasn't what I had planned for my late 60s, certainly not what I had anticipated in the aftermath of a devastating stroke. But it was, in its own way, beautiful. Rich with color and meaning that might never have emerged without the harsh catalyst of betrayal and illness. My son had called me just a burden after my stroke, but had forgotten who funded his entire business. In reclaiming that truth, I had found not just financial justice, but a whole new understanding of my worth, my capacity, my essential self. The burden had become a cornerstone. The invisibility transformed into influence, the ending rewritten as a beginning. And in that transformation lay the most powerful lesson of all, that our stories are never truly finished until we decide they are. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.